You're listening to the Hawke Media Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping entrepreneurs and executives crush the digital marketing game. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's get into the show.
You're listening to HawkeTalk. I'm here today with Todd Herman. How are you?
Mr. Huberman, I'm good now that I'm spending some time with you on a Sunday.
It is mutual. Yeah. Thank you for doing this. So as I always like to start it, let's take it back. Let's take it back when you're 3-4 years old. Did you come out and you're like, I'm going to help people empower themselves. I'm going to be, walking Superman, the Clark Kent glasses. Like that's how you were as a toddler.
Yeah. No, not at all. I grew up on a big farm and ranch in Southern Alberta, Canada. Yep. And, I am a massive people person. I love the energy of other human beings. People would call it maybe being an extrovert. And here I was stuck on this 12,000 acre farm and ranch in the middle of truly nowhere. And I just wanted to get around people. I had this.
Were you that way? Just real quick, you were that way. It's like a 3-year-old. You're like, I just want to be social.
Yeah. I loved. I think it was a byproduct of. Well, I mean, some things are just baked into us. As a parent of 3 kids, I was a big believer in the nurture versus nature. Uh-huh. And now I think there is a real good balance between those two, because there's some qualities that my kids have that I'm like, listen, I can't take credit for that. I mean, that's just, that's just an awesome quality of that little one. But I loved performing. I loved being a bit of the center of attention, not because maybe some of it was because I had a big family and I had 2 older brothers and stuff like that. But I liked being around people. That was just it. And I think I was good at it. So it lends itself to the work that I do.
Got it. And so tell me about the upbringing. Like, what were you doing as a kid? Was there that entrepreneurial side to you? Like how did things start?
Yeah. Well, there was definitely a super creative side of me. My mind was always working on, I wanted to build my own go-kart from scratch in my dad's shop. I wanted to do that kind of stuff. I won an art award when I was 12, when I sat down on a boring day on a Saturday with my sister's Teen Beat magazine back in the 1980s. Yeah. And there was this classified ad that said, hey, draw your best rendition of this caricature of a turtle and send it in. And it was for the Minneapolis Art Institute, a very famous distance learning art institute. And I won the award for the best submission. Wow. So super creative, which kind of lends itself, I think, to entrepreneurialism. But my upbringing was, I just wanted to be active and I wanted to be around other people. But my parents were busy farmers and ranchers, and they never had time to take all 3 boys and my sister to different leagues and stuff. So they threw me in all the time with my 1 older brother, Ryan, who is 2.5 years older than me. So I was always competing if he was in the under 10 baseball team, I was the 7-year-old trying to be scrappy and make it. And I didn't know any different. So it built up a ton of mental toughness for me and resiliency, because there was no excuse. Plus I was a super runty kid. Like, I was short and I wasn't big, but I always made the starting lineup.
That's interesting, because Malcolm Gladwell wrote a famous book, Outliers, about how the people that benefit are the ones that are older and bigger because they get more focused on. And I always felt the opposite too. I was about a year younger than everyone in my upbringing, so you had a few years, which is even more of a gap. And it did exactly that. It wasn't about like, on the run, so I'm never going to do anything. It was like, well, I got more of a challenge, and just felt like I never felt out of place, because even if I was the smaller one, I was going to go for it.
Yeah. And I think it was like, my parents, I don't think consciously did this, but we just had this mentality in our family of, so what, like, do it. And it's a bit of like a farm and ranch thing. Cause I mean, you're dealing with so many variables that you can't control, weather and things like that. And it's like, listen, like, you get to go play on your brother's team, or you don't play at all. Like, which one do you want? Yeah. And so it was very binary that way. And so I didn't have an excuse. And I also had this mentality as I always thought I was better than them anyway. Like there was, I did have a bit of an arrogance to me, which annoyed the hell out of the older kids, because then I would beat them for the starting lineup. But Yeah. So there was no conversation of, oh, well, it's okay. You're younger than them. And so there's none of that. There was no coddling by my parents, which was super helpful. And it's very much the way that I built my coaching and training company is, listen, you say that you want this ambitious thing. Like, why are you whining to me about the conditions or the situations and circumstances that you're in? Like, this is literally a part of the process. And if you don't learn to love this, then you're going to be fighting against this friction all the time. And you're just dispensing attitudinal energy that could be put towards better use.
Yep. You're going to make this a struggle for yourself in perpetuity. We talk a lot about, like, especially as business owners, when I say we, my business partner and I, it's always going to be something. You're always going to be putting out a fire. You're always going to be dealing with the largest problems of the company. And by the way, those never end. Ever. Biggest companies in the world are still dealing with massive problems. Like, it literally never ends. And so if you can't come to terms with it, and I don't know, not even come to terms with it, if you can't learn to enjoy it, you're going to be fucking miserable for the entirety of your career, which, by the way, entrepreneurship is a choice. If you don't like it, go get a job.
Yeah. And I say to clients, because I still do work with, because I've built up, and we'll get to this, but I've built up, what is the world's largest sports training company for peak performance and mental toughness. Yeah. And then I've also built up, I've taken all that stuff, because that's where I started, was the sporting world. And I brought it into the entrepreneurial and CEO and leadership space. And so we've got people in that world. And then we do get people from public figures, like, whether it's politicians or it's people in Hollywood that come as well. But I talk to people all the time when they say, hey, when you're working with someone one-on-one, like when they're willing to pay that price to work with you, what are you talking to people about? Like, whether it's an athlete. And I said, 80% of the conversation is conflict. And I tell people all the time, like, I wake up in the morning and I want more conflict in my life. Yep. I want more. Because if you can't take that attitude to this world, then it's going to break you. Right. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you react instead of respond. And so I call it conflict Cheerios. I'm like, this is just the shit that I eat every single day. Yeah. I love it. Yeah. And the most quality people that I've met, they have that same attitude of, like, listen, these shoulders are built to carry heavy loads. So just stack some more weights on.
I love the nugget. React instead of respond. Or exactly. React instead of respond. It's the epitome of what happened in COVID, where the people that reacted, froze up, didn't go at it, failed. Like, a lot of them are out of business when they didn't have to be. And the people that responded, our friend Curtis Christopherson is an example, who changed virtual training, thrived in situations that you technically shouldn't have, that he should have,
that's right,
painted gyms that should have been devastated, and goes online and now has made, tens of millions of dollars with an online training program. And soon we'll get to reopen his gyms too, and now has a much bigger business.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's part of it. So, okay. So going back to it. So it was football you were playing, right? We didn't actually cover the sport.
Yeah. So, I mean,
a lot of assumptions. You say Southern Canada, it's always hockey, but I think you had played football.
I was one of those few Canadians who, I mean, I loved playing hockey, but it wasn't my sport. I played tons of different sports. I was a nationally ranked badminton player actually as well, but football when I was in high school was the one that I focused in on. And the two things that helped me there was I spent an enormous amount of time practicing what's called field vision. I didn't know it was at the time, but I would have a play drawn up. I had hundreds of plays drawn up, and where people were in the middle of a play, and it was flashcards essentially. Because now, being in this world for a long time, one of the things that people have thought you could never train an athlete is they call it court vision for a basketball player. Mm-hmm. They call it field vision for a soccer player, whatever. And it's just knowing where, it's the classic line from Gretzky, knowing where the puck is going to be and being there, as opposed to where all the action is now. And then you get yourself out of position. So I would practice this. And where this helps then is, because I was a superstar when it came to like punt returns and kickoff returns, I held the record for the most punt returns and kickoff return touchdowns in our province. And then the second thing, because what helps you with that is speed. So I don't know if you remember this, Huberman, but Seinfeld is one of my favorite shows of all time. Okay. So this is going to take some people back, but there's this one great episode with Mel Torme in it, where Kramer buys a pair of these shoes that have a platform on the very toe of them. Mm-hmm. And it's because George was selling these shoes to help people jump higher. And he had this guy, Jimmy jumps. And anyways, Kramer kept on getting hit in the mouth for some reason, and people would mistake him for being mentally challenged because he was wearing these weird shoes and he was like talking with this slur. And anyways, just for a frame of reference, I bought those shoes on an infomercial in 1991. And what they were meant to do was, because the platform was on the toe, was it actually applied 7 times more pressure to your calf and your ankle. So if you were 150 pounds, you were now carrying that weight times 7 on your ankle and your calf. So I wore those shoes and I did sprints and I did calisthenics and stuff like that to build up my fast twitch muscles. So my point is, I ended up being a guy who could run a 40 in 4.4 seconds back in the early 90s, which is a fairly rare thing. So that got me a bunch of scholarships, helped me with my my sport. And then, yes, I got into playing college football. Because
I love it. With the shoes that people assumed are only worn by mentally challenged people.
Yeah, it was. And you looked weird. And the very first time I wore them, I actually overtrained, and they warned you with the training videos not to wear them too much or to go do a bunch of sprints, just get used to them. And I had to wear my cowboy boots for a week and a half because my calves were so, ballooned up. But anyway, so that was my real secret to helping me achieve some of my football dreams. And I don't know about you, but you do these interviews too. Yeah. It's funny, like, in the past, like, we talk about principles, like whether it's attitude towards things, but there are some decisions that you made that were almost tactical.
Yeah.
And they blew it up. And that's why I actually this is why I think, what you guys do is so genius, is you have this ability to talk strategy. Then you've got tactics, and then you've got this pillar of execution. Because if you don't have execution between strategy and tactics, then who cares?
Exactly.
You're just another one of those like mouthpieces who spouts off all these ideas. But it's in the sinew of the execution of applying the tactic, which then you get more tactics. And so I'm saying this because there's a lot of people who poo-poo tactical people, but I can tell you that in the world of like athletics, and then some of the big time executives that I've had a chance to work with, there's some tactical things that are the whole reason that can set up a lot of their differentiation or competitive positioning and their success. So that was my little tactical thing that I did that really helped me in my sporting career.
Yeah. Sounds huge. It's a small tactic that was huge for you because it made that little bit of edge and difference, which is really what all of this is about. Is, we're all kind of, I won't say completely equal playing field. Genetics comes into play, et cetera, but like, people in general are not that different, drastically different.
That's right.
But you add these little tactics, these little things that just give you that slight edge. Sometimes, in entrepreneurship, sometimes it's literally just working that extra hour a day, but it's all these different tactics are compounding. And so it's remarkable what it can come out to. So, okay. So you got really into football. Did you think you were going to be a professional football player? Was that?
I did. In fact, in my high school yearbook, so I achieved one dream last year. So in my high school yearbook, there's 2 things that I said. One, I was going to be the first Canadian to win the Heisman Trophy. Okay. That never happened. The reality was I wasn't a good enough football player. I was good, and I was like, super in my pocket of the world, but I wasn't as good as the other guys that were out there. And, So that was one. And then the second one was, I was a huge lover of NFL films and their documentaries that they would do on players, like the gridiron stuff from the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And I said, the other thing I said was, someday you'll watch me on NFL films. And that's the one that came true last year. Was NFL films did a bio and documentary on the work that I've done in the NFL and the book that I wrote, The Alter Ego Effect, and being known as the guy who builds out the secret identities and alter egos of pro athletes. So I achieved at least one of those 2, which I think is a pretty good. It's a pretty good.
You're the pick and shovel instead of the gold rush, man. You're not the guy trying to, for fame. You're now helping everybody else achieve it, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So where did you end up? Did you play in college?
I did. I played in college. I had a bunch of scholarships around the United States and then Canada. Ultimately, I decided to stay in Canada and played at the University of Alberta. Lasted a year. I blew out my knee and my fibular head and my patella and stuff. So I was pretty much done after my first year. And and decided that I was really only at university for the football anyway. And it wasn't because I couldn't get school. I was a smart kid, but my ambitions were, I was such a pragmatic person that when I was in economics classes and business classes and psychology classes, I just had this feeling like this is all theory. Like, because I've got enough life experience, a little bit of ego there as a young kid. We kind of all do that, like some boys do.
We figured it all out by 15. I get it.
100%. Yeah. that was one of my enemies I had to battle against. But I just didn't think that it was almost true. And so I went out and I started a business in 1995 called agrimal.com. It was about 8 months before eBay started, and it was an online auction site to help farmers and ranchers. Every farm and ranch, anyone who knows farming or, even acreages, everyone has this machine graveyard where all these old machines go to die. But it's scrap metal. It's sitting there. And so I was like, wait a second, why don't I put on an online auction site where all these farmers and ranchers can get rid of stuff and sell it online? Well, huge market issue there. You know who's not an early adopter of technology? Farmers and ranchers. And this is before, and I was in my head, I was like, oh, this is going to be streaming video stuff. Long before streaming video was a thing. But it was, I think that's the beauty of entrepreneurship, and what I love is just the massive ignorance it takes to launch some things. Thank God you were ignorant.
Yes.
Because if you knew it all before, you would just see the mountain and you'd be like, no way. Whereas most entrepreneurs are like, oh, I just need to get to the top of that cliff. And then you get there and like, oh, it's a false mountain and I got to climb to that one. And then it's another false summit, so to speak.
It takes that and that arrogance you've spoken to where it's like, I can do this. Like
totally.
There's so many, and including my own experience, like so many times that I'm like, everybody else does this so stupidly. Like, why does everyone do it this way? That's just a dumb way to do it. And then you get up there and you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. But it's really crazy that we didn't do it that way. It's like, everyone's walking up a trail and you're like, but you can just go straight. And you start going straight. And as you said, you hit a cliff and you're like, oh yeah, they could have just taken that trail.
Yeah. If you're not good at eating humble pie, entrepreneurship just is not the game for you.
But I'd say it's a balance. It's humble pie with a continued unwavering arrogance, because you need to be humbled, but then you also need to continue to march towards it in a direction no one else does. If you want to be a higher level of success, you can go the same route and be, have some level of success, but the true successes come from people that march against the grain and go do something completely out there. Like Steve Jobs investing the entire company's resources into creating a MP3 player. And then a cell phone. It was like, why?
Yeah. And I think that's, I don't know about you, but I think that's the stuff that's, I don't want to call it X factor, but I would say that, I'm not the visionary type entrepreneur where I saw where things were going. You kind of said it before, pick an axe. I was more of a guy that was, chop wood, carry water. Mm-hmm. And my philosophy was, I thought, if I just kept on working every day and getting better, that I'm probably going to find some nuggets of gold or a vein that could lead to somewhere. And some of that is also just the stuff that I actually try to help people with, which is like, if you can't really enjoy the process of what it is that you're doing every day, then you're going to be a worn out person, whether it's an athlete, because that's very outcome-based thinking. And so you got to find the ways of really enjoying this process. But so I wasn't a great visionary. I've always been amazed by people who do have that vision for things. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if it's an X factor, but that whole, I'm going to throw all my eggs in the MP3 basket was, a brilliant move.
Yeah.
Or even Bill Gates with, I don't want to build the hardware, but I want to own the software that's on it. And him seeing that and IBM not seeing that, that was, if IBM came back and said, no, you don't get to own the software. Then I don't know if there'd be a Bill Gates story as big as it was.
Yep. 100%. So, okay. So you start, the original eBay for farmers. And how old were you? Like 19, it sounds like.
So I was 19. It was before my 20th birthday. Yeah.
And did you move home after you decided not to continue in college, or did you?
No, I stayed in the city that I was living in, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, at the time. And I was there for about 9 years before I moved overseas with the company that ended up growing. Okay. And but Igormal didn't last very long because I needed funding for it. I didn't have the money for it. And I was just super green. But again, I learned more in that 8 months of trial and error with that than I could have in a graduate degree in business, frankly. Like it was, and just the conversations I ended up having, because I'd reach out to people that were successful, business owners or entrepreneurs in the Edmonton area. And Edmonton was a great city to be in, because it's rife with like really great builders of typically manufacturing business, because it's so close to the oil and gas sector. But anyways, like it was good. And then that went on to, I had to make ends meet. So I was working in restaurants at the time. I was a waiter, and I ended up moving into like management. And then by the time I was 20, I actually won Restaurant Manager of the Year for this big company, which it's Earl's and Joey's. Anyone in Canada knows this. It's a different chain of sort of contemporary, really cool place to go and eat. Like it was always it was a scene type place. And then, but I always want to stay close to sports. So I was also volunteering at a high school, coaching the defensive backs. And this was like what launched my little sports business. And I was spending more time teaching the kids about the mental game, because that was my strength. I'm not 6'4", 256 pounds of solid muscle, but my strength was my mental game. Some of it, born out of where I grew up, and some of it born out of, I had some pretty traumatic stuff happen to me as a young kid, that, you don't really want to wish on any young kid. And it just ruined my sense of self-worth. And, I battled depression, suicide throughout my teens and 20s, actually. Mm-hmm. And so I got into reading more about mindset, mental toughness. I was just trying to grab onto anything that could help me. And through this process, I was, and this is actually going back into high school, I was learning how to get into the zone and flow state. So that's what actually propelled my athletic career. Was I was playing every game in the zone. And then when I got into this volunteering mode at the high school, I was talking to the kids about, how they could do it as well. And they started getting phenomenal results, not necessarily just on the field, but it was actually off the field in the classroom. Uh-huh. And then people started asking me to like mentor their sons and daughters. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to. And I wasn't even thinking it was a business. I was just like, yeah, sure, I'd love to help. And then they would say, well, how much do you want to, or this one lady, Deb, she asked me, well, how much do you want to charge for her son, Kirby? He was my first client. And I said, I don't know, $75 for 3 sessions. So this is in 1997. Yeah. And that's when I started my coaching career. It was 97, long before coaching was a thing, long before mental toughness coaching was a thing at the like the juniors level. And I stayed at that price point for 3 years. So I wasn't like great at pricing. And my average, when I did my quick-in taxes at the end of the year, my average hourly rate was $8.56. That's how much I was actually making from this business. And I was working in the mornings and in the evenings, because that's the only time that these young teenage kids would be available. Mm-hmm. And, but it got me a ton of reps working with like, kids who wanted to make it. Yeah. And that was I in the end, I tell the story, that was my one secret. And I think that's one of the things that people get lost on today is they don't want to go through the process of learning.
You want to be there.
Like there is, everyone wants to be there before they're even here. Yeah. And everyone wants to charge the mega amount. And I'm like, listen, like I now have 18,000 hours working with the most elite athletes on the planet. Like, Real Madrid's a client or was a client for a long time, Yankees, New York Rangers, guys on the PGA Tour, NBA, you name it. And Olympics, podiums. And then you've got leaders in entrepreneurship and business, and 18,000 hours of one-on-one time, just mano a mano, me and you. Yeah. That's a very different level of vantage point of what the most successful people are actually doing. So I really go at people. Like one of our differentiators as a business is the fact that we have the reps, but we use practical science mixed with the pragmatism of what people are actually doing, not the stuff that you read in the self-help book from the guy who researched. Because there's only so much you can get from research. Yeah. Because I'm not, but when you and I are talking, I'm actually in your head. I know what you're actually thinking. And most of the time, the stuff that the elite are doing it runs very counter to the stuff that you're reading in some of these books that are out there. And so the reps, people don't want to get the reps nowadays. And then in 2000, I reached out to the giant of the industry. His name's Harvey Dorfman. He wrote literally the Bible of the mental game world called Coaching the Mental Game. It was a cold intro or a cold outreach. And I just said, hey, Harvey, we haven't had the chance to meet yet, but I've started this little fledgling business. I'm about 2.5 years in, and I know enough to know that I don't know enough. Like I know that there's a ceiling of stuff that's above this that I'm not getting from any books. And I've just been reading enough books on psychology and human biology and even kinesiology and behavioral economics were probably some of the best books, because behavioral economics is applied psychology. And that's where some of you're going to get some of the best stuff. And so I said, listen, I'd love to come down to North Carolina, because it was during the baseball offseason. He's known as the Yoda of baseball. This guy worked with all the biggest names. And I said, I'd love to come down and just organize your office, take administrative stuff off your desk. I'm sure you've got another book that you would like to write. And 2 days later, he reached back out and he said, you don't want to come live with me, kid, do you? And I said, is he like, I don't know you. And I'm like, no. I've got an aunt and uncle who live in the area, and I can stay with them. But, I've just read all this stuff, and yours is the only stuff that makes sense. I was a former athlete, and your stuff makes sense to me. So he said, all right, let's do it. So that was January of 2000. And I went down to North Carolina. Now, I lied to him. I did not have an aunt and uncle who lived in the area. I stayed at a Motel 6 that was about 5 miles from his house. It was $28.50 a night. And I maxed out my credit card because I wasn't making very much money. I didn't have.
I'd say that's actually pretty expensive for 2000. You could probably rent something in North Carolina for cheaper than that.
Yeah. Well, it was a little bit before some better research of it was available online.
Fair.
So that's what I did. And on the 8th day, Roger Clemens came down to spend his day with him. Like, it would be this annual pilgrimage of the best players would come down to see Harvey, before he got taken up by another team. Cause, he always made January available so he could do his freelance work with the best of the best. And then February, he'd be on the San Diego Padres' coaching staff. And that's where he did his contracts. So Roger Clemens came in, and Harvey invited me in to sit on that session. And I got to see the master work with arguably one of the greatest baseball players of all time, and see what he was actually challenged by. And then Andy Pettitte came in, and Craig Biggio, like the greatest baseball players of the time, were all coming in, and I got to sit in and see. And that took me from this, I was a pretty good mental game guy to like just rocketed me up. And then Harvey started funneling clients my way. And you talk about like, that's the thing that people don't get is nowadays, this mentorship or apprenticeship attitude, like people are just missing out. Like they want to build it all themselves. Like if I'm a making in the marketing game, reaching out to you and saying, hey, don't pay me. Can I come into your company and be next to you for 3 months? I'm not going to be a bother. I'll just take stuff off your plate. You boss me around all you want. If I could just be around Erik's brain for 3 months and see how things work, that would be amazing. Like people don't do that very often.
No. And it's actually illegal in the United States now. I can't even say yes to that. They got rid of they have all these apprenticeship laws because people are taking advantage. Like I get, it's the problem is the lowest common denominator thing where a lot of companies were just getting interns and then go file papers, and you can't be in my meeting. You can't come learn from me. So colleges can give college credit for it, but it's actually one of those interesting, they did it to protect people, but it's basically eliminating a huge part of how people that don't normally have access to that education could learn. So I agree with you though. It's, we all did the same thing. I mean, I've spent a lot of time with people way smarter than me, just, learning from them and, taking their time, but offering something in return or trying to be helpful. And it's such an important aspect. So I am curious though, what gave you sort of, the chutzpah to call the greatest in your field and be like, hey, I want to come move down from Canada to North Carolina to spend time with you. Like you were, how old were you at that point too?
So I was 25 at that time. 25.
And what were you still working in a restaurant at that point? You were coaching okay.
I had just left. Okay. And then I was basically full-time in this, private practice that I had. Yeah. Uh-huh. And so I think some of the best reasons why we ended up going and doing it, if we're honest about it, it was very much frustration and disillusion.
Yeah.
So one was again, going back to this maybe farm kid pragmatism, salt of the earth mentality of things. I just felt like the stuff that was written in these books was just crap.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't what I saw working. And so it was that. And then it was frustration very much. Like it was, I always had this sense, you asked this at the very beginning, when being 3 and 4, like, did you think, if I'm, and this is actually very much a quality of people that I've worked with anyway, they have this sense that they're meant for something special. Like they have this sense for that. Kobe and I spoke about that before he passed away. I was actually driving up to Newport Beach the day that his helicopter went down because we were bringing the alter ego training into his Mamba Academy. The stuff that I'm known for is building. And I mean, and I've always used Kobe as one of these like great shining examples of someone who employed this idea. And, but, I had this sense that there was something that I was meant for, like that there was something that was not special or unique about me, but there was this, I know that there's something that I've got. And, but I was frustrated that I felt like I was under indexing in some way. And so that was it. And it was just, I read that book. I read Harvey's book, Coaching the Mental Game, at the right time to kind of meet up with all these other forces of frustration and angst that I had. And that was why I did it. And it wasn't that. And my parents also gave me the best piece of advice I've ever gotten in my life, which was, when I was leaving the farm, they knew that I wasn't coming back to the farm and be, taking over. My other brothers went and did that. And, but my mom said to me, she said, hopefully we've given you like some good life lessons around character and integrity stuff, but we're not gonna be able to help you on your professional career. So the only advice we can give you is whatever you want to go and pursue, find whoever's the best at it. Only settle for the best and go and tuck yourself underneath their wing or go and learn from them. And that always rang in the back of my head. And that's always been my mentality around even the vendors that we choose for our business. It's like, why settle for average? Because, it's not that you get half the results, you probably get 10% the results. Like you get a 10x return on working with the best. And so spend the money on the best, or spend your time with the best. And that's Harvey he just resonated with me very differently.
Got it. And so, I know we only have a few more minutes here, but would love to hear. So the path from there. So you meet with Harvey, you really get that X factor, you start getting some clients.
Yeah.
That was 2000. So bring us up 21 years of this. What,
yeah. So, I mean, so Harvey started funneling people my way because he just didn't have enough time, and he was just the man. And then that continued to build up my roster of pro athletes. And because I built my business on the back of really one marketing tactic, and that was speaking. I was a 4-H kid. Anyone who's out there who knows 4-H, it's like agricultural Boy Scouts. And a part of the 4-H world as a youngster is you had to do a speech every year in a competition. And I won actually my very first year when I was 10 years old. And so I was a pretty good speaker. And that's how I built my business. And I built up this talk called the Triune Athlete, the mentally, emotionally, and physically tough athlete. And when you unite all three of these together, you end up creating the greatest possibility of performance for someone. So I did these talks, and me standing on stage, it was a brilliant move. I didn't choose it because it was brilliant. I chose it because that was all I had. But it was a brilliant move because speaking is one of those things, and this, it's the ultimate influence. I think it's more than video, podcasting, and everything else, because I have seen people who are great at podcasting be terrible speakers. I've seen people who are great on video be terrible speakers. I've seen people who are great authors and writers be terrible speakers, but I've never seen a great speaker be a bad author, a bad podcaster, or a bad, a video person. Because we call it a forcing factor skill. It forces so many other things together. So that's how I built the business. And the great thing about it was it actually launched my next company, which was No Limits, which I ended up selling 6 years later to Chevron, which was a gentleman came up to me and he said, listen, I loved everything you just said. We're dealing with the exact same problems though, in our company. So can you use this peak performance stuff with working with businesses? Do you do this? And any good entrepreneur says, yeah, absolutely. Of course,
all the time.
And so that launched the next business, which was taking the same strategies that we were using and just put them in with a different avatar and group of people. And I built up this huge performance and leadership company working with the Canadian government, Indonesian government, South African government. I worked with Nelson Mandela, built out the leadership program for all their Black managers. During the what they called equalization of the workforce, which was the switch over from apartheid era stuff. So helping all the Black leaders there with like confidence and leadership skills. And, you know, Chevron, Shell, like all these big companies. I ended up going in the energy space is the one who found me more than anyone. And I ended up selling this big leadership business to Chevron in 2007. All the while still working in the sports business world or sports world. But, you know, one of the key things that I found in that process of working with all these people individually was that the best of the best, most elite athletes kept on bringing up this idea of an alter ego and secret identity. And then that's what I became known for, was building up and really helping performance at the identity level. Because what people don't realize is when you change your identity, all things change with it. So while everyone else is talking about changing your beliefs or your habits, I'm coming in and I'm going to like the root force cause. And when you change that, you don't need to go into what I call the tangled web area of beliefs, because the moment someone hears that it's a belief issue, we're wired now psychologically and societally to think, oh, that's a belief, because everyone knows how hard it is to change a belief. But I can change your identity quickly using an alter ego. And it's built into our human psyche. Like we've all done it when we were young kids. So I found this uniqueness factor. And then I wrote the book a couple of years ago, which has been like a great bestseller for us. And it's been translated into 13 languages. But that's kind of like a very fast version of the entire process of the last, 17 years. But a part of that, if there was things that stayed consistent, was I always sought out apprenticeship. I still do. I still seek out mentorship. I only want to be around the best of the best. And just the very thing that caused me to get into this world, which was some angst and frustration as a youngster, it's still very much a part of our brand. It's how we show up. Like I am not the most liked person in the personal development performance space, because I will call you out or your company out when you're flat out telling bullshit to people. And
that's where we have something in common. We're in an industry that 99% of it is crap. So, with it being a very needed, real thing, so many people that are full of shit flock to the industry. It's kind of a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, and you know this, right? Like, so some of the ways that we can build up our businesses is through affinity, right? Like, oh, so-and-so said this nice thing about me, and then you reciprocate that. And then you end up losing kind of who you are in that process. I just see, I gotta coach some people out of that, like at that level. And they're giving up parts of their character, their value system that way. And I'm like, listen, like I'll give you a good example. Affirmations, scientifically proven through multiple studies to cause depression and depressive states in people. And yet it's been one of these great pillars that the people in the self-help or leadership role.
That's interesting. I've actually never heard that study, but like I've always hated like the posters, the motivational posters, the affirmations, all those sides of things. It's like I feel that causes Instagram more stress. Yeah, exactly.
So here's the nuance with it, and it follows again the model of life. The greatest teacher is nature, right? There's growth and decay. That's the only two states in nature. You know, up, down, inside out. And so you can't have one thing. It breaks the scientific principle. You can't have one thing that's only good. Like water is a good example. Water sounds great, but if you drink too much of it, hyperhidrosis, and you drown yourself. Okay. So affirmations, when you're trying to affirm something to yourself, and this has been done at the University of Waterloo in Ontario, King's College in London, the Neuroscience and Research Lab at Stanford has done this study. Like I could go on and on. That when people say affirmations to themselves, when they don't believe it yet, or they don't have confidence in the thing that they're stating to themselves, causes them to actually move into more of a depressive state and could cause depression in people. Now, the only time affirmations have been proven to actually work is when you're affirming something that you have confidence in, some level of confidence in. It reaffirms it, and strengthens it. So, someone coming out and saying affirmations are the way to go, they changed my life. It's like, I rail against experiential teaching anyway. I did it and you can too. Like
using yourself as the anecdote. Yeah.
And that's why, like you guys have hundreds of clients operating in so many different industries. Like we can't take the same webinar marketing formula from the e-com space and go and throw it over into the manufacturing world. Like there's things that have to be switched up. So, that's my problem with the industry, the space. And now everyone's got their opinion and everyone wants to kind of climb back down the mountain and share their experience. And, I always put those people in check, because I'm like, have you done the reps? Show me the people that who've actually come and paid you money to change this. Not that you sat around at the dinner table at a influencer dinner and you shared your thoughts on success with people. right? Like people pay Hawke Media for marketing.
Yep.
So when people are giving marketing advice and someone hasn't come and paid you for your marketing advice, for me, you're just watered down.
What I'd argue is someone that continues to pay you. We always say like we're month to month. Yes. They and people stick around. That's the symbol. Anyone can sell anyone into something, but I know because we obviously know each other. I know that you've had people working with you for years and years and years and years that have done really well working with you. So like that's the evidence. All right. So I know, again, I want to get you out on time. So two last questions. One, what's next? What's on the future docket? What are you creating?
So what's next is I'm launching actually a software platform to help people in the coaching industry grow and scale actually the back end part, because one of the hardest parts of coaching or mentoring or building up group coaching stuff is the delivery side, the organization, the systems, the customer follow-up, and the CRM side of things. So we're actually launching in a very short amount of time. It's actually in a week here from this date, May 16th. Awesome. And so I've got two amazing co-founders who connected with me about this. And so we've been building out the product the last year. So I'm super pumped. It's called upcoach.com. So I'm really excited about, I went out and bought that domain. The person didn't realize what the value was, what they had. So we got that. That's what we're doing. And then the other side of it is a lot of focus around actually family stuff. Like I've got 3 little kids and, I've got, I don't want to get my ambitions in the way of being a good dad to them too. So there's some discipline there around pumping the brakes on, because you and I both know, like we can keep on being hungry hippos and just grabbing more and more and more and more. Yeah. So it's the discipline of continuing to run my training companies and coaching companies and building those and getting the word out of alter ego stuff. And then the SaaS platform. And I'm a pretty happy camper then every day if I'm doing that stuff.
Love it. And last question, you're the guy to answer this more than anyone. What's one piece of advice for someone that really wants to achieve their dreams, and something not cliche, like work hard, but something that you think they haven't heard, that for someone that wants to really get there?
So I don't know if it's something that they haven't heard, but to reinforce this, that I really think that the X factor in life is the quality of the contacts that you have. And because you and I mean, it's such an unfair advantage that I could just text you and say, hey, we're looking at doing this as a positioning statement or something, like anything marketing wise or psychology wise. And you giving me your 2 cents in less than a day or connecting me with someone is such a huge advantage. So I would say to people that, when I take a look at all of my biggest growth periods, it was always because of the humans that I was around, or the mentoring that I was in, or some relationship that I had. So I think relationships are the grease slide to success. They open doors for you faster than anything else. They get you in the side door, they get you in the back door. And so while there's so many other skills that of course are super important, communication skills, which are going to help you with your relationship skills, I think, just what am I doing every week to get around better people, or to get better people into my Rolodex or now my iPhone contacts? That's key. And the only way to make that work is, what can I do for you? Like how can I make your life better? And I think it's such a simple thing. Everyone can do that. And the crazy thing is not many people do it. Like I don't get pinged as much as I should, frankly.
Yep. Totally agree. Well, Todd, this has been awesome. Thank you for coming on HawkeTalk. Really appreciate
Absolutely,
you.
Man. Appreciate it, buddy.
Of course. Talk soon.
You've been listening to the Hawke Media Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, make sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.